Prisons have long been a reflection of the darker side of society, representing not only the criminal acts committed but also the lengths to which those in power will go to punish offenders. Throughout history, certain prisons have stood out due to their horrific conditions, unjust incarcerations, and outright brutality. Below, we delve into some of the most infamous prisons, past and present, from Vietnam's Phu Quoc to Cuba's Guantanamo Bay. Phu Quoc Prison, a legacy of suffering. Phu Quoc Prison, located on Phu Quoc Island in Vietnam, was built by the French during their colonial rule in the 1940s. Originally designed to house Vietnamese political prisoners, it quickly became infamous for its overcrowded cells, poor sanitation, and brutal treatment of its inmates. After transitioning to U.S. control in the 1960s, the harsh conditions persisted, with prisoners subjected to appalling punishments, minimal food, and non-existent medical care. Disease ran rampant, and suffering was a constant. One of the most harrowing punishments endured by prisoners was the tiger cage, a barbed wire enclosure so small that prisoners couldn't sit or lie comfortably without touching the sharp wires. After the Vietnam War, Phu Quoc Prison was closed in 1975, but its legacy lives on. Today, the prison serves as a memorial and museum, with mannequins reenacting the torments suffered by prisoners, drawing over 10,000 visitors annually. El Salvador's overcrowded hell prisons. Prison overcrowding is a problem that spans the globe, and few places exemplify this issue more than El Salvador. With cells often just 12 feet wide and 15 feet tall, some holding over 30 inmates at once, the conditions are undeniably dire. Originally intended for 72-hour stays, many detainees languish in these police holding cells for over a year due to the country's overwhelming crime rate, largely fueled by gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18. In response to rising crime, El Salvador has adopted severe law enforcement measures, leading to increased arrests. In January 2023, the Salvadorian government opened Chateau, the largest maximum security prison in Latin America, which houses high-ranking gang members. Cells at Chateau, designed to hold 156 prisoners, are devoid of privacy, with grated ceilings allowing guards to monitor inmates constantly. Despite international human rights guidelines, prisoners at Chateau have no access to outdoor spaces or family visits, further exacerbating their already dehumanizing confinement. Chateau d'If, a fortress of despair. Originally built in 1524 by order of King Francis I to protect Marseille from sea attacks, the Chateau d'If later transformed into one of France's most notorious prisons. Thanks to its remote island location and strong offshore currents, escape was deemed impossible, making it a perfect site for life sentences. The conditions varied based on social class. The poorest prisoners endured crowded, windowless cells, rife with vermin and disease, with a life expectancy of just 9 months. Wealthier prisoners could buy more comfortable accommodations, but life at Chateau d'If remained bleak. Immortalized in Alexander Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo, the prison became famous for the tale of Edmond Dante's daring escape. In reality, however, no such escapes were ever recorded, as the surrounding waters all but guaranteed death for anyone attempting to flee. Coffin prisons of Mongolia, a medieval nightmare. In a horrifying method of punishment, immurement, or live entombment, saw prisoners sealed into tiny spaces with no hope of escape. This practice, which dates back to ancient Rome and was used by the Vestal Virgins, resurfaced in the early 20th century at Mongolia's Urga prison. There, inmates were confined to coffin prisons, small boxes measuring no more than 4 feet long and 2.5 feet wide, in which prisoners couldn't lie down or stretch. Each box had a small porthole through which minimal food could be passed, prolonging the prisoner's suffering. The conditions were so barbaric that this form of punishment was outlawed in Mongolia in the 1920s and was later prohibited globally under the 1966 United Nations International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Guantanamo Bay, a modern-day controversy. Arguably one of the most infamous prisons in contemporary history, Guantanamo Bay in southeast Cuba has become a symbol of the tension between national security and human rights. Established in 2002 as a high-security prison for those deemed a threat to U.S. interests, Guantanamo Bay holds prisoners indefinitely, often without trial or formal charges. Inmates experience severe psychological distress due to the uncertainty surrounding their detention, as well as extreme interrogation techniques, including sensory and sleep deprivation. Hunger strikes in protest of these conditions have been met with force-feeding, drawing widespread condemnation from human rights organizations. Guantanamo Bay remains a stark reminder that the human rights violations of the past are far from forgotten. Conclusion: lessons from history. The prisons mentioned above serve as chilling reminders of humanity's capacity for cruelty. Whether it's the barbed wire tiger cages of Phu Quoc, the overcrowded cells of El Salvador, or the sensory deprivation in Guantanamo Bay, these places expose the dark underbelly of the prison system. While some of these institutions are now mere relics of the past, others still operate today, raising questions about the balance between justice, punishment, and human rights. As history has shown, the horrors of these prisons may not be as far removed as we might think.